What's up, guys? Imagine you sail up to this beautiful South Pacific island, which looks so good right now because I don't know about y'all, but I'm tired of this winter. And I pulled up this photo and just, I can smell the salt air. But it'd be pretty amazing to sail up to this island and you meet the locals. And you tell them you're from America, and they say, "Oh, yeah, America, great, great. We love America." In some broken English, of course. And they tell you they've got a monument built on top of the mountain to the gods, and the gods are from America. I'd be like, "Okay, I got to see this. Let's go." And as you're starting up the mountain, you look over, and here's all these people with big sticks, and they've got USA painted on them. And they're doing what looks like military marching drills. Then you get up to the top of the mountain and you see this. Yep, that's a bamboo airplane, and they've even got a flight tower and a runway cut into the top of the mountain here. Now, in today's day and age, you'd start putting two and two together and piece this together of what's going on. But imagine it was like 1640 and you came across this. You wouldn't know what a plane is, or a runway, or a flight tower. We'll get back to that part of things in a minute because this is a really interesting anthropological study. And it does beg the question of, did this happen in our ancient past? This might sound kind of funny at first. It's actually a little sad in a way because these people have formed a religion, and this is truly what they believe, just like anybody else that's been taught to believe a certain way since birth. If you were to sit down with them and hear their side of the story, they'd tell you that in 1940, John Frum came. And he wasn't just a normal man, he came as a spirit. And this guy right here will say that all the village elders, including his father, went and met this spirit of John Frum. The spirit of John Frum told him that in the future, America will come. There are many nations out there in the world, but just remember, America is your friend, your brother. And sure enough, 2 years later, the Americans actually came. So this prophecy came true. This is a very primitive society. I don't think they had any metalworking. We're probably talking Stone Age technology. Believe it or not, there are still thousands of tribes around the world that still live that way. Anyway, their prophecy came true, and then they tell you that the planes come from paradise and their ancestors sent them. But that the white man is a crafty pirate that manages to get the planes by their trap down at the port. And that the planes were built by the spirits of their ancestors, and the planes were full of all these wonderful things that were meant for them, their descendants. And so you build your planes, you build your runway, you just gotta have faith, man. Wait, hold your faith. Sooner or later, your ancestors are going to figure out the white man's trap and send the planes to your runway, and everybody will be rich and happy. I know a lot of you have figured out exactly what's going on, but I know there's some people sitting there going, man, what? So 1940 is World War II, of course. Christian missionaries had first shown up in 1890. And by 1940, a lot of the islanders had already had Christian education, which we'll get into later. But then the spirit of John Frum, an American, came out to their little island out in the middle of the Pacific. But it wasn't until 1941 that Pearl Harbor happened and America got into the Pacific theater. If he's got his dates right, then why were Americans scouting the South Pacific in 1940? Now, John Frum was most likely just John from America, or, they've built it into the spirit of John Frum. They've got a prophet to their religion. I mean, it goes deep fast. But John Frum showed up, allegedly 1940, 1942. This prophecy comes true, and America shows up. And, at first they come with all their ships and, their landing craft. They've got all the trucks, all of the bulldozers to make the runways. And, I mean, everything from ink pens to refrigerators to ice cream. This would all be absolutely mind blowing to a primitive mind that had lived on this island in relative isolation for who knows how long. But these white men start building runways and they can tell something's really going on there. But also, they're doing all these strange rituals where they all get in a line and they walk together and do all this weird ritual stuff that doesn't really make any sense. They just do this and then they go on about their day. And then these planes start flying overhead and just start dumping all of these boxes out. Just tons and tons of this stuff. And they just call it cargo. And it comes from America, this place that you have no conceptualization about. America might as well be heaven, because who could possibly make this stuff? Man couldn't have made this. This had to have come from the gods. So eventually you catch on. You're like, wait, they're doing all of these marching drills that don't make any sense. So that must be a ritual to the gods to get them to send the planes. Maybe if we get out and we do their ritual, maybe we can do their ritual better than them, and they'll send the cargo over to our landing strip. Now it all makes perfect sense. And guys, the Christian missionaries did show up after World War II, and pretty much all of these islands have had contact by now. There are a few that are protected for prosperity's sake, but this is still a religion to this very day. I think there's only about 300 or 400 people, but at a time, this is what everybody believed. This is what they taught their children. And some people still to this day get out and do the daily ritual. They raise the flag at 8 o'clock in the morning. They take it down at 4:30. They do their marching drills, and someday the cargo planes will come. That's why they call these cargo cults. And this is where it gets really crazy if you think about our own history and our own beliefs. How did all this get started in our own cultures? Well, watch what happens here. They made the first documentary on this in 1963. Got a young David Attenborough, and he's interviewing a chief that tells him, yeah, John Frum still visits me. And David Attenborough says, okay, so you heard John talk, you shook hands with him? And he says, yeah. Polite English David Attenborough doesn't believe him, and he says, well, when did you see this? Daytime, nighttime? He said, nighttime. About 7 o'clock. But the spirit of John told him and nobody else that if you follow me, maybe someday the cargo planes will return. Now, this is 20 years after a technologically advanced civilization showed up to a relatively primitive one that did already have contact with British missionaries. They probably showed up on wooden sailing ships. But when the U.S. Army showed up, it was just mind-blowing technology. There's no way that man could have built that stuff. It had to have been built by the gods. And now you've got one guy that talks to the spirit that had prophesied the Americans coming. Now, what did compel our ancestors to do the things they did, build the things they did? Most of the oldest structures on Earth are temples. And every single culture throughout history has their own version of the gods or God. Everybody knows the basic premise of like the Greek gods and Roman gods, the Abrahamic religions, Christianity. But when you study these indigenous tribes and peoples, there's some pretty crazy stuff. Everybody's heard about the Israelites carrying the Ark of the Covenant into battle, and I about tripped out when I was reading this book from the 1600s on the Aztecs, and they carried what he described as an ark into battle, and it was a shrine of their god Huitzilopochtli, and he's got goat legs, a head and a stomach, all this weird stuff. And this tribe of people spent a while wandering, not having a homeland, and their god Huitzilopochtli, that I can't say, told them where to go, what people to attack, and all kinds of really crazy stuff that it's a video in itself. And I'm thinking this is a lot of strange similarities with the Israelite story, where they carry the ark into battle with them. But you know what? If you're a tribe and you've got a god of protection, a god of war, and you have some idol or token of that god, then aren't you going to carry it to the battle with you when you need it the most, you know? So this was probably done by a lot more cultures than you might think. But with this, they say the Israelites paraded around Jericho for 6 days with the ark, and 7 times on the seventh day, and then the seven priests blew their trumpets, and the walls came tumbling down. And I'm sure everybody's heard the ancient aliens and lost ancient technology. People use this as proof of lost ancient technologies. And to tell you the truth, I really don't like bringing any supporting evidence to that side of the table. But unlike a lot of people, I do believe in looking at all of the evidence objectively and not ignoring the bits that don't fit into your narrative. And the reason for that is the internet has made history a popularity contest. And I see a lot of people out there that are seriously using more faith for their lost ancient high technology than those islanders and their John Frum religion at the beginning of the video. And just so you know, very little of the research that's on the internet today actually came from the age of the internet. This is David Hatcher Childress back in 1992 talking about the flying stones of Nan Madol and blowing the trumpet and vibrational frequencies and all this. Now this has turned into a multi-billion-dollar industry where the only requirement for being an expert is by saying the official narrative is fake. Where the people that are saying that actually don't have any idea what the official narrative is, unlike David Hatcher Childress, Graham Hancock, Aaron Von Daniken, the people that pioneered all this, have a thorough understanding of history and how to put it into context. So the Ark of the Covenant, it may have been a powerful weapon, lost technology that we don't understand these days. But carrying an ark into battle may not be as unique as you think. Might have been done by all kinds of people in the ancient past. And it might be a legend that arose after a comet screaming through the sky, sounding a loud trumpet, hit a city, and these people went over there and collected all of their gold and silver after they were all wiped out. I've shown numerous depictions of a comet being associated with a trumpet. And just think about it. A comet ripping through the atmosphere at umpteenth mile per hour, or possibly even a plasma discharge, and it's making a loud noise like a trumpet. That's not too far out of my scope of reason. Or it could have been the will of God that if you do as I say, then I will conquer your enemies for you. I know some people don't like my style of open-ended questions, but anybody telling you that they know the answer doesn't, and I'm just trying to get you to think things out. Look at all the evidence. Now, back to how all of this relates to our ancient history. What they say is the oldest structures in the world, which you can tell they're pretty old, like the Ziggurat at Ur. It's a temple. And to have a temple, then you're most likely going to have the priestly class that somehow always ends up living in luxury and eating the best foods of all the peoples, having fine clothing, wearing gold and silver, while the followers do all of the work that makes it possible for that priest class. Now, in some places, like Angkor Wat, they say that the people believed that it was a god king, a deity was ruling over them, and they were actually happy to do the work. And this is a nice as above, so below. But let's look at the case of the Aztecs, which they called themselves Mexica, which is the root of the country's current name of Mexico. And there was a Spanish priest that I can't think of his name right now, but he's known as the first anthropologist because he did actually sit down with some of the Mexica that had lived in the time prior to Cortez and lived in the time of Moctezuma. So we do have records of of people that actually lived in that generation, although this was about 20 years after the invasion. He was interviewing a servant of the royal palace, and he asked what Moctezuma looked like, and he said, "I have no idea. I never dared look at him." So even in this culture, that they were only a couple hundred years old at that time. They founded Tenochtitlan after the catastrophes of the 1300s. They were wandering for years, and all of the lands were already occupied by other peoples. And so they decided that they would make an island out in the swamps of Lake Texcoco, and this wound up being the biggest, richest city in all of the world at the time. Tenochtitlan was more populated than London, and even in the 1600s, 100 years after contact, when the cultures had assimilated together, it was still the richest city in the whole world. And this is still a mystery I'm trying to get to the bottom of, because I've got a book from the 1600s talking about Mexico City, Tenochtitlan. But then in Mexico City, 1970 something, they were digging out for some construction work, and they found this big, huge Aztec disc down there. Prior to that, nobody had any idea that the ancient city of Tenochtitlan was underneath Mexico City. Then the archaeologists and anthropologists got to work, and they discovered that this big, huge stone disc sat at the base of this huge pyramid in the center of Tenochtitlan. Sorry, there's just a lot of really interesting history that goes into all of this, but back on point, Moctezuma and a whole royal class ruled over all of these people and lived in absolute luxury. Here's a computer sim of what it was like back in the day there. And this is what was told to that Spanish priest in what's now known as the Aztec Chronicles. Once they used to keep a record of their history, but it was burned at the time when Itzacuatl reigned in Mexico. It was agreed, and the nobles of Mexico said, it's not fitting that all the peoples should know the paintings, the writings. The common serfs will be led astray, and the world will be made crooked, because in the documents are many lies, and many heroes have been taken for gods. So are we talking about an ancient technologically advanced, as today people understand technologically advanced? To me, a sailing ship is very technologically advanced and very underappreciated. Now, I don't agree with the official narrative that peoples on opposite ends of the earth independently came up with pyramids. I don't see this as a self-evident structure to build. It's not something that you would just say, oh, well, this makes sense. But it doesn't make me take huge leaps in any direction. It just makes me think, well, okay, they knew about each other, or someone from Egypt had visited Mexico, or vice versa. And by now, everybody and their brothers made a video talking about the Great Pyramid of Giza being a free energy device. Well, what about all the other pyramids everywhere? What about the Nubian pyramids? Are these all free energy devices too? And notice how all of these have been torn about halfway down. All the rubble's been cleaned up now, but that's because grave robbers back in the day tore these things down, and when they got down to the burial chamber, they took all the gold and left. Now, I guess you could say that that's where the energy devices were stored, but what happened to all of them? As much as they try to cover up, as much as the Smithsonian has covered up giants, we still all know about giants. You don't think that if in the 1800s when they did this, that if they got a nuclear reactor out of there, that it wouldn't be valuable and some of this information would have leaked out? Anyway, to me, this just says that, okay, these people were in contact. And I can show you thousands of examples of shipwrecks that are still being found to this day, where the internet has utterly failed to provide one bit of evidence that there is any other mode of travel capable of crossing the oceans. And if you think about it, 3 months on one of these cramped ships with a bunch of smelly other people would have been absolutely miserable. So I don't think people were vacationing in Tenochtitlan from Egypt. The official history says that they didn't have vessels capable of crossing the ocean at that time. I disagree with that. I can show you a ship expert that says if a ship is capable of sailing 20 miles, it can sail 2,000 miles. It's just common sense. But the ocean is a rough place, and you got to know what you're doing, or they're never going to hear from you again, which was the case with Mansa Musa. This guy was a Western African king that was the richest person in history, they say, hands down, when he went on Hajj, or Islamic pilgrimage, to the Holy Land. He gave out so much gold along the way that he broke local economies. Anyway, this guy could afford the best ships that man could make, and he sent 2 expeditions out across the Atlantic that just disappeared. This was in, I think, the 14th century, and did he have knowledge that there were people over on the other side of the ocean? Sounds that way. But when I look at the cargo cults in this tiny island of Tanna in the 1940s, I see a mirror of our ancient past. The Americans showed up, John Frum showed up, he made the prophecy, the Americans came, and then after they left, well, then you still have one priest that still talks to the spirit of John Frum. You give this a couple hundred years, you're going to have a whole royal class descended from the priest that could talk to John Frum. And watch what else happens here. Back in the 90s, Fred had returned from a fishing trip, and he made a prophecy. He told everybody that the lake was going to overflow. And then sure enough, a short time later, the lake overflowed and flooded the village, carried everything back out to the sea. Now you've got Fred here, which you can tell by listening to him. He's just a humble guy that was trying to do what he thought was right and warn everybody, and then they gave him the name of a prophet. So now Fred is a prophet of John Frum. See how this all works? And then you've got the holy man, where the spirit of John showed him this cave and told him to fast for 3 weeks and 3 days, after which the spirit of John commanded him to change the name of the village from Lamakara to Orori. And he believes that one day everyone will see the spirit of John. He truly believes this. There's no guile, no deception, or anything to him at all. Watch the documentary. You can tell he believes this with good intention. And this is why I said at the beginning it's actually a sad story when you get down to it. And it's not my intention in any way to shake anybody's faith. If you made it this far, then you're in for the long haul. But this did happen, is happening. And if you're diligent in your search to find out the truth and figure out the mysteries of this realm we live in, then these truths should be acknowledged. Now, going back to the prophet Fred, he saw the accident happen before it happened, and it happened. I mean, so was this a true divine intervention? Was it some latent psychic abilities coming through? This is just one of those things we can't explain with our current understanding. Now, let's go back to the beginning of this, and let's take the technology out of it. Let's say John Frum came, and he said the Americans were going to come, and they all just came in canoes. Or let's say sailing ships, because that is a big technological advancement, but not quite Stone Age to airplanes. But let's say they showed up with sailing ships, and they only were slightly ahead. They made fishing easier. They made life easier, life better. They were fun to be around. And then they all left, and everybody was sad to see them go. Would you still have a priest that says, well, hey, I still see the spirit of John Frum, and he talks to me? Well, yes. You could have had the exact same thing happen with the story of Cortez and Moctezuma. What if Cortez hadn't been a complete psycho person and just visited and then peacefully left? When Moctezuma first heard of the Spanish landing, which Tenochtitlan is hundreds of miles inland, so there was already, a communications network, and word reached Moctezuma way before the Spanish did. And it's populist history that he thought that they were the gods, but when you actually get down to the nitty gritty and study of it, what he told Cortez was that his ancestors said that they came from another land. And there were powerful rulers there that they absconded from, basically. So he basically told Cortez that you must be from the peoples that used to rule us. So, in essence, what we have is yours. By all accounts, Moctezuma was pretty much a spoiled rich kid of royalty and not very much of a leader. In the case of the cargo cults, it did happen to be a culture that was so far advanced of what they knew that it was incomprehensible. And when looking at the rest of cultures and the rise of their priest class, it very well could have been. I'm not saying that it's not, but there's 10 million videos out there all talking about ancient lost high technology, so I don't think I need... Everybody's heard it. You guys know that side of the story. I'm just trying to provide a counterpoint here. Because what we do have is all of a sudden someone knows the will of the gods or a higher being than themselves, which would give rise to a priestly class, which has happened in every culture. And I'm just going to end it with one last thought here. Basically, every culture around the world has a tradition that the gods taught them writing, technologies, all of these things. The Greeks, you have Prometheus. The Mexica, Quetzalcoatl. The Egyptians, Thoth. Let's say you did have alien spacecraft come down to Earth and contact all of these cultures. You would think that all of the aliens on board would be from the same culture. You know, maybe it was the International Space Agency of Betelgeuse that sent a delegation down here. But you would think their writing system would be somewhat uniform. But if you look at our oldest known writing systems here on Earth, the Egyptian hieroglyphics, the Mayan hieroglyphics, ancient Sumerian cuneiform, ancient Hindu Sanskrit, these don't even come close to resembling each other. So I would not entertain the thought that these all came from the same source. There's different night and day, so they appear to have come up independently of one another. Now, this could be a case of monkey see, monkey do. You see someone else that can read and write, and you eventually sit down and come up with your own system. But as far as extraterrestrials crash landing and getting out and teaching everyone how to read and write, no, I don't think so. On the other hand, if you look at petroglyphs that are found all around the world, you do see similarities carved into rocks in various places all around the world. And, you know, if writing systems came from the same source, you would have something more like this, I would say. But what I think happened here is this is plasma phenomena up in the sky that everybody saw, so it's recorded the same all around the world. Anyway, this may have been the most pointless video you ever watched in your life, but I find it all very interesting. I think it's a in-depth look at society and humanity, and especially how there always arises a priestly class who lives in luxury while everybody else toils to provide that way of life for them. So maybe someday John will come and fix all the world's problems. But until then, I think it's up to us, the people of the world, to try to make the world a better place for everybody, not just the royalty. Besides, how did they get to that position in the first place? Static out.